Welcome to the Voice of Reason with yours truly, Robert McNeily. This show will be all about you, the American people, politics, punchlines, and a dash of that Western charm and that divine providence that has blessed us for nearly 250 years. It will be a mix of politics, of culture, music, and sports, really everything that not only President Trump loves, but what you love, the American people, bringing you subject matter experts on a whole host of a variety of topics. Thank you for watching The Voice of Reason with Robert McNeily, right here on the right side of history at RSBN. Don't want to feel another touch. Don't want to start another fire. Don't want to know another kiss. No other name falling off my lips. Don't want to give my heart away to another stranger, or let another day begin. Won't even let the sun shine in. No, I'll never love again. Welcome to the Voice of Reason on this November 6, 2025. Things on my mind lately, Mr. Director. Did you know in 1912, Theodore Roosevelt running for a third term. Yes, a third term under the bull moose mantle. They called it progressive at the time, but really what it was, a populist movement fighting for Main Street America. And the unthinkable happened. The speech that stopped a bullet. The Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library highlighting his life almost ending on the campaign trail in 1912 while running for a third, at the time unprecedented, term. Teddy Roosevelt was the victim of an assassination attempt at the hands of a violent and deluded saloon keeper known as John Fleming Schrank. Now, I won't go in so much into Mr. Schrank and his background as it is online there for you to research as not to glorify the individual, but it is a part of history. Now, this happened at a Milwaukee, Wisconsin campaign stop while Theodore Roosevelt was running for another presidential term with the Bull Moose Party, having left the Republican movement of the time. The former president was leaving his hotel to attend a campaign event when the vengeful Schrank stepped from the crowd and fired. Two things saved his life: a steel case for his glasses and a manuscript of the 50-page speech. Now, both objects slowed the bullet, which ultimately lodged in Roosevelt's chest, stopping just short of any vital organs. The man had true grit, as you see today with something like a President Donald John Trump. Now, Theodore Roosevelt's legacy endures as an angry mob quickly formed around the would-be assassin, as enraged Roosevelt supporters realized what had just happened. Now, the president was able to calm the crowd, stopping them from hurting the would-be assassin until the police arrived. True courage, true forgiveness in a moment that could have gone awry and otherwise. Now, refusing medical attention, Theodore Roosevelt went on to give a life-saving speech while bleeding tremendously through his shirt. Copious amounts of blood, in fact, as he famously told the crowd, "It takes more to kill a bull moose." Boldly, and people at the time proclaiming that his speech is truly inspiring to the American people. Now, the bloody shirt, after finishing the speech, TR himself was finally taken to the hospital by his aides. Doctors concluded that it was safer to leave the bullet in his chest rather than risk removing it. So President Roosevelt's bloodstained shirt remained a symbol for the lengths Roosevelt would go on to achieve with his convictions and the mercy he would show to the man who tried to kill him. Schrenk was ultimately sentenced to life in Wisconsin's Central State Mental Hospital, where he died after 29 years of imprisonment. A story today to reflect upon the assassination attempts of this year, those successful, those not, which have created ripple effects of sadness throughout the American ethos, but also with revival and a reclamation on the halls of our government buildings to the pews in our churches throughout America, from city landscapes to rural cornfields and those cotton fields that I aptly saw most recently at a dear friend's wedding as I went through the South and felt that Southern comfort that only you, the American people, could wrap your arms around your humble correspondent in such a way that's unique, being that I am a Yankee Doodle dandy from the Chicagoland area, where I have found home to truly be in the Southeast United States of Alabama and Georgia. We're grateful here at Right Side Broadcasting Network that we can bring you such coverage with the dash of Western charm, politics punchlines, and ultimately, what's the downstream of culture? And we'll continue to comment on it, like, share, and subscribe right here at Right Side Broadcasting Network. You can always write in with feedback at rsbn.tv on The Voice of Reason every Thursday, as tonight we have a focus on education in the Peach State, and that's with Dr. Randall Trammell, who is running for state school superintendent, an important position that you might not have heard of and that will be down ballot in the 2026 midterms. So prepare, as we are really rushing our way to next year's elections. Welcome to the Voice of Reason. It's Dr. Randall Trammell running for Georgia State Superintendent. Thank you for joining us, sir. You mentioned in your media kit that you love that book, Find Your Why. I think that's something for everyone to discover, whether it's in vocational training to how they serve their community and ultimately what they do in life. How did that inspire you to run and make education excellent again in the Peach State?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. First off, I'm so glad to be with you today. Always glad to be with friends and fellow patriots. So for me, the Find Your Why, the big existential question that I'm trying to answer, and I think ultimately we all are, is how can I take my life and make the biggest impact on the lives of others? And there's no doubt in Georgia, well, and in general, the biggest impact that anyone can have on generations to come is through the education system. And I see it through my own children. My oldest is 10, my youngest is 5. And, I certainly want to make sure that they have the best and want to make sure that our other students across the state also do.
Now, how can Georgia improve in its educational foundation? We saw that Governor Kemp really signing school choice, being a champion of that. The Republican legislature, in turn, actually increasing salaries for those in education, whether it's the administration and especially teachers, which is a huge triumph over the course of the last couple of years. How does the state school superintendent really oversee Georgia to make sure that it's competitive against all other states around the nation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, right now we rank number 38 in the nation in education, which is a statistic that is just mind-blowing, particularly given the fact that over the last 12 years we have been ranked consistently number 1 as the state to do business in. And if you compare that over time, We cannot remain number one state to do business in if we are number 38 educationally for a couple of reasons. Number one, um, as employers are looking to move their companies to our state, they want to have a great place for their students to learn, the children of their employees. And also, we are producing the workforce through our education system. So the state school superintendent has a lot of influence, whether it is on the standards that are required for local school systems to teach, or it is for educational policy. You mentioned the governor signing, bills into law. One of them that was signed into law this past year has to deal with literacy and teaching students to read. And it's a wonderful law. Representative Bethany Ballard, my friend from Houston County, represented it, and it's a good bill. The sad part is, though, that's educational policy, and the legislature should not have had to intervene with that. It's simply a decision that the Department of Education could have made.
Now, do you find that as well with in lieu of the Patriot Act from so many years ago during the Bush administration, really being the legislative victory of the late Senator Ted Kennedy? Do you want more to be done through the Department of Education, as you mentioned, or are you supportive of what Linda McMahon's doing with scaling that back and allowing the states to really make it a state and local factor in the building of education instead of standardized tests that really are one size fits all?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm 100% supportive of dismantling the United States Department of Education. If you look at its lifespan since President Carter introduced it, it's done little to improve education, and has just really created a bureaucracy that creates more red tape for our local state and local school systems. So I'm absolutely 100% supportive of doing away with that. I think the closer you get to the classroom, is where the educational decisions are best made. So, as the U.S. Department of Education is dismantled, those funds and that accountability then shifts down to the states, which is why it's so important that you have a state school superintendent who can administer those accountability standards and also fairly distribute those funds to make sure that we make a great investment, and see a return on that investment of American and specifically Georgian taxpayer dollars.
And being that we were in an off year election this week, we saw that Tim Echols and Fitz Johnson unsuccessful in their re-elections for public service commissioners. So run us through the office you're running for, what it does other than simply regulating these standards, but also how to get that message out there, because it seems as if without a President Trump at the top of the ballot or outside of just a presidential election, some people at times seem uninspired to go to the polls either early or on the day of. And it doesn't make much sense because ultimately it's these offices that have the most effect over your life, your livelihood, and the taxes that you pay.
The old saying, all politics is local. It's so true. And, the politics that touch your life the most are those local positions, your mayor and your county commissioner, your school board members. And then if you zoom on out a little bit at the state level, Public Service Commission, which you mentioned with Tim and Fitz, that's a little heard of position. So I think there was a few things that we were battling there. Number one, it's a municipal election, so very few statewide races out there. In fact, those were the only two. And the other thing is that not a lot of people are just aware of what the Public Service Commission does. Now, it's not much different from state school superintendent because as I'm campaigning across the state, I can't tell you how many times people have said, "Well, I can't vote for you because you're not in my county," and of course I quickly say, "Well, are you going to vote for the governor? Or are you going to vote for lieutenant governor?" And they're, "Oh yeah, yeah." I'm like, "Well, I'm one of them. I'm on the ballot to be a constitutional officer." So there's a lot of misgivings about what the position does or who it is, etc. Um, Overall, the state school superintendent sets policy, sets the vision for the department, sets best practices. And the next piece, though, is major and is currently missing, helps hold school systems accountable. One of the things that we're seeing right now, unfortunately, in Dublin city schools is they're essentially bankrupt. And to the tune of, I've heard as high as $22 million. The State Department of Education knew that 3 years ago when they stopped turning in audits, but no accountability was given, and now you're at a crisis moment where a school system is likely to shut down. So having that accountability, having that transparency, supporting local schools and superintendents and teachers is absolutely the job. And part of it is just showing up and listening and providing that day-to-day leadership that we're not seeing now.
And how do you bring, as you mentioned, the number one state for business? We've seen Georgia grow so much, and really the southeast region of the United States. We might see that in lieu of the recent elections this week with some very, very radical positioning of just the New York City mayoral election with Mr. Mamdani. As people come into Georgia, how do you bring up those educational standards? Because it really is not like the No Child Left Behind, one size fits all, but rather you have rural communities, you have suburban communities, you have the city of Atlanta, and perhaps one of the most diverse populations in the entire country.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you so aptly mentioned, education is not one size fits all. And there's some very important basic things that we can do across the board. So, for example, right now in the state of Georgia, 70% of our third and fourth graders are not reading on grade level. That's terrifying because we take that third grade reading level, we extrapolate that data and, look to the future of how many prison beds we need to build. So there's a direct correlation between your ability to read and, your ability to be successful in life. The once former First Lady Barbara Bush said, "If you can't read, you can't succeed." Just to put it, where the brass tacks are. But in terms of um, listen, well, remind me the question real quick, so because I want to answer the right question.
Oh, yes. With the idea that bringing the state is dominating in
Yeah.
business, really number one, but it's 38th in education, as you mentioned. How do you
Yeah.
level that playing field? Because we've seen in other states, for example, before moving to Georgia, I was from Illinois, the Prairie State. We saw the opposite: great educational standards,
Mm.
great schools. Heck, our property taxes that were trying to fund the pensions. That's why there's a pension crisis, and they're in the red with the state government because those property taxes correlated to public education. Problem is, a lot of these bright minds are being lost to other states like Georgia because of the business attraction. So
Sure,
how do you
sure.
balance it in that opposite direction of bringing up those educational standards as more people move down to the Southeast?
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, reading is basic. So we want to, a lot of attention and publicity's come up recently with Mississippi. They were number 48 in the nation. And they're now, depends on which scale you look at, number six or number 10. And how did they, and I often joke, Mississippi just got electricity last week, so what's going on? But the truth is they got serious about teaching the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, and civics. And that's what the most recent literacy bill here in Georgia did, was it forced us legislatively to really teach something called the science of reading. Older folks like us would probably know it as phonics. The old commercials, hooked on phonics, work for me. Well, it really does work. It worked for Mississippi and it can work for Georgia. But let me expand that. We've got to do our public education right. We've got to teach the basics and make sure that we're delivering uh, excellent student outcomes. But I think a key example to that, or a key ingredient rather, is the idea that, of course, not every student learns. I have three children. They're all very different. My oldest is autistic, high functioning, but nonetheless the needs are different. School choice, or parent choice, as I like to call it, is so important. Parents know what their children need. And I am a huge champion of giving parents every tool in the toolbox. and making sure whether it's charter school, magnet school, um, college and career academy, traditional public school down the street, where it's School of Arts, or specialty schools, or even public school, private school, homeschool. I want to make sure that parents are empowered to make those decisions and not the government. I often tease that we go into the grocery store, and something as simple as mayonnaise. There's a whole aisle of it. There's so many choices. You can get it, made from free range chicken eggs. You can get it with, olive oil. I mean, all sorts of choices. But yet with schools, we accept the fact that we live at 123 Main Street. And because we do, that little brick building at the end of our street is where our students go. And what's sad is that we have many wonderful schools in Georgia, but many of them are failing to deliver on the promise that we've given to teacher or given to our communities, that we're going to give them the absolute best. Now, I am 100% in favor and support of public schools, but I think that, as you see in Florida and Mississippi and other states, that parent choice has got to be a key element to our uh, revision or revival of education in Georgia.
Yeah, sometimes it becomes linear thinking, and we want to remove the seed oils from those line of thoughts, just as we do at the grocery store with our wonderful system of capitalism and making America healthy again. But speaking of that as well, Dr. Trammell, are you seeing those educational numbers and some of those struggles and concerns, as you mentioned, with those not at a specific reading level due to the COVID pandemic? Did that have an overarching effect? Because we saw with Governor Kemp and Governor DeSantis, they were really the leaders who went off on against the grain in order to reopen things in Georgia and Florida. And then you saw this mass migration coming down to the Southeast as a result of that. But are there some blockages in learning given what took place with the pandemic?
Well, certainly there was an educational impact from COVID. If you go back and look prior to COVID, our reading, literacy, and numeracy scores were actually on a downward trend before COVID. Certainly it was exacerbated by COVID. But, we're almost 5 years out from COVID, and I think we've got to stop playing the blame game and just saying, this is where we are, and this is how we're going to move forward, and just get the work done. Certainly it's a challenge, but we can't let our past define our future, and we've got to learn the lessons that were to be taught during that time, and we've got to move forward and make sure that our students today are getting the very best for their outcomes and for their future.
So with school choice, parents' rights, a local focus, how do you also see this in the office you're seeking? It truly should be bipartisan, is it not? With private, public partners, with the churches, also, again, the dinner table issues at the forefront. Who would oppose such common sense ideas?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think when you start talking choice, a lot of the educational community, and listen, my wife's a teacher. Most of our friends are teachers. I often tease that, you mention educational choice, and they clutch the pearls. It's one of those things where it's not, I'm not creating a competition against the schools. I'm creating competition for the schools. And, that free market idea, those that offer the best product are the ones that are going to be successful.
Dr. Randall Trammell, running for Georgia State School Superintendent. Thank you, sir, for taking time to visit the Voice of Reason. We hope to see you again on the campaign trail as we gear up for, can you believe it, 2026.
I know, it's crazy. It's here, and we've got work to do. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Thank you. Our thanks again on the Voice of Reason for Dr. Randall Trammell to break down educational policies and the importance of the upcoming 2026 election. We saw in Georgia that Fitz Johnson and Tim Echols unsuccessful statewide in the recent off-year election that took place on Tuesday. But a winner this week. We find it to be a gentleman of gentlemen, truly a prince of a man, and a Turning Point USA Auburn University chapter president, Jacob Bruce, who did an amazing job at the Turning Point tour where we attended and had the opportunity to speak with Senator Tommy Tuberville, running for governor of Alabama, along with the guests that evening from Benny Johnson to Eric and Laura Trump. It was a star-studded evening, and our biggest pleasure to start off that show in the prime time, speaking with the smart, intelligent, and wonderful students right down the street from us at Auburn University. So well done, Jacob. Excellent speech, and I look forward to our continued partnership to help make our country great again and to dialogue and debate and celebrate free speech just like Charlie would have liked to see it on the college campus and beyond. The losers this week, I'm sorry to say, the residents of New York City, New Jersey, and Virginia. You have elected big government socialists and a communist in Zoran Mamdani. God be with you, as you've also elected someone whose violent rhetoric in Jay Jones as the Attorney General-elect of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I hope that he does not act on his words, as we've seen horrible violence this year due to political difference. You should never, ever, ever leave a relationship, especially a friendship, based solely on a disagreement on politics, and it should never turn violent in the United States of America. We stand strong on that position here on the Voice of Reason and the whole of Right Side Broadcasting Network. This day in history, November 6, 1860, Republican Abraham Lincoln of Illinois elected the 16th president of the United States and the first Republican president in the Union. Exactly 1 year later, Jefferson Davis elected to a 6-year term as president of the Confederate States of America after secession, and many on the North seeing this as an illegal move, as their construct of Confederate and weak government at the time. The president of the CSA would be limited to 1 6-year term. Some have argued for that now in the modern presidency of the United States of America. Also in presidential politics, 1900, November 6th, Republican United States President William McKinley and his Vice President Theodore Roosevelt, as we mentioned earlier on the show, defeat Democrat William Jennings Bryan, and with the death of the 25th president, ultimately leading to the 26th presidency from 1901 to 1909 of that Teddy Roosevelt. In 1928, Republican candidate Herbert Hoover is elected president of the United States, defeating candidate Al Smith. You may know the Al Smith dinners, where President Trump put on great shows of comedy, especially against Senator Chuck Schumer back last year in 2024. A great event that is a favorite of Italian Americans and the Catholic community, specifically in New York City. 1940, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a distant cousin of the 26th president, is reelected as president number 32 for an unprecedented 4th time before the 22nd Amendment and term limits. Karol Wojtyła celebrated his first Mass on November 6 of 1946 as a Catholic priest. You may recall his name because he ended up becoming the future Pope John Paul II. Eisenhower defeating Stevenson in 1956 and reelected President of the United States, the World War II general, the hero, and the 34th President of the United States, defeating Adlai Stevenson of Illinois. Adlai Stevenson II, the governor of Illinois, and then Democrat candidate. In 1962, Ted Kennedy, the uncle of Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., elected for the first time as a Democrat in Massachusetts, and ultimately leading to 1984, November 6, in presidential politics, the incumbent Ronald Reagan defeating former Vice President Walter Mondale in a landslide of 49 states, the United States president and former actor winning with roughly 525 electoral votes in perhaps the largest scale victory, if memory serves me correctly, over the 42nd Vice President of the United States, Walter Mondale. Also in recent history, the Communist Party outlawed in 1991 under Russian President Boris Yeltsin, outlawing the Communist Party in the former Soviet state of the Russian Federation. Kuwaiti oil fires also in 1991. The last oil fire in Kuwait set by retreating Iraqi troops is extinguished. Those are some of the dates of what happened in recent years on this November 6th. Thank you for joining us on an earlier edition of The Voice of Reason. Be sure to catch us every 6 o'clock Eastern on Thursdays for that dash of Western charm, politics punchlines, exclusive interviews, some man on the street, and much, much more as we examine and bring some common sense, bring some voice of reason to what's happening out there in the American story. For all of my colleagues at Right Side Broadcasting Network, this is The Voice of Reason. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you on The Voice of Reason next week, Thursday.